Hi, thanks for being in a new video. This time I have a review of the Realme Note 60. Let's start. This device is aimed entirely at the entry range, so it will offer us a simple configuration of 4 GB of RAM with 128 GB of storage. Its launch price in Mexico is 3,499 pesos. That's more or less $175, although remember that prices here are not the same as over there. In this price range, you are going to find several competitors like Moto G24, Little M6, Galaxy A5s, Redmi 13C, in short. There are many competing in the same price range, and in this case has a good distribution to find it in physical stores, not only in online stores. So this could become a positive point, but what do you think if you join me to know the rest of features? Let's start with the design section that encompasses several aspects. First, let's see that on the front we will find considerably reduced bezels. A small drop notch at the top, and the bottom bezel has a thickness a little larger than the rest. But I think it complies well aesthetically, although in this front we will not find any kind of Gorilla Glass protection. But at least it comes with a mica glue that is supposed to protect in a good way. This front side. On the right side, we are going to find fingerprint reader, which at the same time is power button, also volume buttons, this in a plastic frame. The top part does not have any kind of button or additional port, while on the left we find the tray to place the micro SD card, or you can also place 2 SIM cards, which comes quite well. Although surely if you buy it with Telcel or with any phone company, the second tray will come locked. Pay attention to that, please. At the bottom, we are going to find headphone jack, also a microphone, USB-C port, and the speaker, which is the only one it has. This device has a price of 187 grams. Its thickness is 784 millimeters. So in that, it can get a standout, and its construction is mainly in plastic. The design of the back cover, I think it can become attractive in visual terms, as it has some waves that make it look very nice in different light reflections. But what this device really wants to stand out is the endurance. In fact, it's a trend that I'm seeing little by little in several Chinese manufacturers for the entry range, which promise different types of reinforcement. For example, realme claims that this brings something called armor shell protection, which has a reinforced aluminum structure inside. It also has a metal inner frame, even though the outer frame does not appear to be metal. They also ensure that the glass is reinforced. It comes with this mica that I was telling you about, and also on the internal plate where the circuit and all the components are, it is also supposed to have some cushioning to prevent it from being damaged in some falls. They also claim that they use a component dosing glue in all the internal parts. So, as I say, I think they want to emphasize a lot the resistance of the device. It also has IP64, which makes it very resistant against dust, and as for water, let's say it can withstand splashing or even being submerged at a shallow depth. But what do you say we do a little bit of extreme testing and see how it does? Let's first do the test that I drop it in the water. It's shallow because it doesn't have IP67 or 68, so we're not going to put it through such an extreme test. But let's see how it would do in these accident scenarios. The device is working, it's in the water. I'm going to leave it for about 5 seconds. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Let's see. It's out. Let's see if it's still working. In this case, I think that if it holds up well, at least let's wait a few seconds so that it doesn't suddenly turn off. But as you saw, I submerged it here. It is shallow water, so it does not have such an extreme test, but at least it seems to have resisted the water well. Now we are going to try to bend it, and we will see. I am applying I think it's holding up well. I'm not applying extreme force, obviously, but I think it's holding up well. Obviously, if I want to break it, I think I will be able to break it if I apply extreme force. But for the pressure that it normally suffers when you have it in your back pocket, I think it is holding well. And well, finally, we are going to throw it. In particular, this is a pretty heavy test. Let's drop it first from a simple height. Let's see, there it is. Let's get closer. Look how the frame was damaged here a little. Obviously, if it is going to get hurt because it is not a metal frame, then I think it is going to have noticeable marks from its falls. In this case, it fell in the corner. We are going to try to do another test now that it falls with the screen on the floor. Let's see, there it is. Well, again, I think it held up well. In this case, we could also say that the mica could get to hurt a little, but it is resisting well. Let's go to a last test because it is not an all-terrain device, but it could stand out in resistance. This is a pretty tough test. At this point, I think it is going to break, but let's see. There it is. And what do we see? It did not break. It held up well. Obviously, as I say, it will have marks of the damage it may suffer, and it is recommended that you leave the mica. If we remove the mica, possibly break easier, then I think it's fine. Still works after these tests. I think it does come to stand out in resistance. Finally, forgotten to comment that in addition to this is the option in black color. It is also available in blue color, although it is called black, but I see a touch of purple on it. I do not know if it happens to you too. Well, let's say it is black and blue. The screen is 674 inches. I think it is quite large. Offers good space, which is positive. However, it offers HD resolution 1600 x 720 pixels, and combining a very large screen with a low resolution results in 260 pixels per inch, i.e. in the text, if you could get to notice the pixels, even in text with small fonts could also get to notice little sharpness. Also, the screen technology is LCD, so it does not offer us very good viewing angles, nor does it have such spectacular or very high brightness. However, I think the colors are represented well enough without offering such saturated colors or contrasts as intense as in an OLED screen. I think for the price range, it's still a good quality screen. The positive thing is that it offers us 90% hertz in the refresh rate, so if we have fluid movements when navigating the system, at least in terms of the movement that can represent. The display, its peak brightness is 560 nits, as I say, is not so positive in terms of outdoor viewing under sunlight. But fortunately, the minimum brightness is quite comfortable for use in the evenings, and even if you have the option of extra dimming within the accessibility option, so its use, as I say, is comfortable. So I consider that in terms of hardware, the screen is not too attractive, although in the price range, I think it is very difficult that the software comes with good options, as it has an option to keep the screen on while it detects that you are watching it. This is quite useful if you're reading long text that suddenly cause you to take a long time and the screen turns off. We will also find two color calibration modes, natural and vivid, although honestly I do not notice much difference between these two modes in terms of color intensity. But in any case, it is appreciated that it is present, plus it brings a manual calibration of the color temperature. Finally, it also has an option that will raise a little more color saturation on YouTube and also within Google Photos, which I think helps quite well when viewing multimedia content. In summary, I think the screen is not bad. What I would have liked to see better is the resolution, as I think there are other competitors. We're not really sure what full HD screens offer us at this price point. In sound, there is no surprise, only brings a speaker at the bottom, so it offers mono sound. Obviously, it will not be of very outstanding quality. In fact, the mids come to stand out more. It has practically no presence of bass frequencies, so there is nothing remarkable. In fact, at the software level, there will not be anything very remarkable either, because it has no equalizer, no Dolby Atmos, although it does offer something called reality audio, which in a way tries to be kind of like Dolby Atmos, obviously only available when you're using headphones because it tries to give you a little bit more of an immersive experience. But before we talk about headphones, let's listen to a little test of this speaker, although remember it's not the same listening to it live. As I say, I don't think there are any surprises. Of course, we would have liked to see stereo sound, but the price range is still not something that common. The integration of the headphone jack was a must, and yes, it is present. And speaking of wireless sound, it supports codecs like SVC, AAC, and the surprise is that it does support LDAC. I think we finally see something positive in this section of sound. So if you buy high-resolution headphones that have in this codec, if you're going to be able to enjoy as long as you use a music service that offers this audio format in very high resolution. Now let's talk about the microphones. Although in this case, unfortunately, we must speak singularly. It only has one microphone on the bottom. That's going to cause two things. For starters, your videos are not going to be recorded in a sort of wider sound format. And also, if you're on a call or recording audio, and you accidentally plug this microphone, you're going to get, I'm going to stop listening completely. So it's not such a pleasant experience in that sense, but we're going to listen to a test.
Esta es una prueba grabada con el micrófono del Realme Note 60.
As you notice, I think the audio picks it up well enough. In this case, it doesn't apply any kind of noise cancellation or anything like that when you're using the microphone for things other than calls. However, for calls, it does have artificial intelligence noise reduction. So let's give it a try.
Primero escucha el sonido que tenemos de ruido ambiental.
Now let's listen to how my microphone is sounding on the other cell phone where they answered, hello, hello, can you hear me? Perfect. In this case, we have a completely silent environment, but I'm going to play a sound.
Escucha más o menos cómo está sonando ambiental y ahora vamos a cambiar a cómo se está escuchando el micrófono en la persona que me está contestando la llamada. ¿Me escuchas con ruido o sin ruido?
Escucho muy bien, muy claro y nada de ruido.
Perfectamente bien, gracias. Nos vemos la próxima. Adiós.
Adiós.
As you notice, I think it does work well, the artificial intelligence noise cancellation of the microphone. So again, in software, it gets to compensate a little bit for the fact that the hardware is quite limited. Of course, we'd love two microphones, but if you're just going to use the microphone for calls, I think it's fine. Now let's listen to a test of how it performs in very noisy environments. The video you saw was recorded with this device to test how the microphone is. And as you realize, the positive is that it does not get to saturate the microphones, even in very noisy environments. The negative is that I think not to saturate comes to lower too much gain. And even in a very noisy environment, it seems that the volume is too low, Yusan. But as I say, the positive is that it does not saturate. However, it is not going to be recommended for recording concerts, because it only has one microphone, and in a concert what you want to record is the immersive experience, so it does not deliver in this aspect. In the price range, I think there are some options that offer two microphones, and to close the vibration motor is on the Z-axis, what we would expect from other devices at this price, so the vibration is not so premium. When typing with the keyboard, it does not give such a nice feeling, nor when interacting with other elements of the system. Front camera is 5 megapixels with f2.2 aperture and fixed focus. Obviously, it is simple. What we can do is draw one or with the screen off, although this option is disabled by default. But you can activate it. As you can see, the camera interface is a bit customized by Realme. But at the same time, if you access the settings, you realize that this is actually a generic interface that Chinese devices of very simple brands bring. So I would have liked to see all the realme customization layer and not what we are seeing in this case. Note that it does bring a beauty mode option with different parameters, but I insist it is more or less what we see in generic brand devices. We will also find a button to load some filters that we cannot preview in real time. But there are available also something positive is that it also has HDR, which you can turn on, off, or leave on automatic, which is more advisable. Although obviously when using HDR, the capture will be a little slower and will take time because it makes a long capture. Note that in the settings, it brings an option called dynamic button action, which will turn the power button into something more interesting. Because if you touch the power button, it will do the action of capturing the image, a photo. Be careful, you don't have to press it because it will turn off the screen. Just tap it to make it work as a shutter. In the settings, you can also turn on gesture recognition so that by simply showing the palm of your hand, you can activate a countdown and take a picture easily. I think the software is complete, albeit with a very ugly aesthetic. As you can see, this front-facing camera has a remarkably low level of detail. We're going to see that if you try to get close, there will be an excess of sharpness to try to bring out the details, but the real detail is not present because of the low resolution. It has fixed focus, but you can be more or less far away or close to the camera, and either way, I think you will have good focus. Of course, if you want to get the closest details of your face, it's not going to be possible. In backlit conditions, the preview is not well optimized, but after you take the picture, fortunately, it's not very good. It does make a good balance of light and shadow. There are no burnt areas, although they do appear a bit more grainy than we would like. Indoors, the photo quality still remains good considering the price point, and at night I think it manages to control noise well, although colors may lose a bit more saturation. Of course, at night backlighting will be where it will suffer the most, but it is understandable for the price range. Note that at night we found a good enough quality of delay, with the same shortcomings of traditional photography, that is, with colors a little less saturated than the account, but the blur is nice. On the other hand, in the daytime we confirm that it does not have an object detection, so simply by artificial intelligence it will detect body parts and face, but it will not have so much precision. On the back, we are going to find 32 megapixel camera with f-aperture 1.8 and autofocus. It doesn't have optical stabilization, and the second camera is useless. It's simple decoration. Supposedly, it will help portraits or with artificial intelligence or something, but don't believe them. This is a camera that really doesn't have more than to say, look, my cell phone has two cameras, but in reality, it only has one. Note that in this case, the agility of the camera is good enough in constant shooting. It is not perceived as a camera too simple in speed and responsiveness. In our test trying to capture number 3, we noticed that it takes about a quarter of a second to respond after pressing the shutter, so it's not that nimble a response, but in the price range it's fine. The burst has a limit of 20 pictures, and as you notice, it takes about half a second or so to start again, I think expected in the range. If you click on the viewfinder, you can adjust the focus and you can also adjust the exposure. Although fortunately, if you want manual settings, you can also access the professional mode, which is listed under more modes. Although in this case, I don't like that the navigation in the camera modes is very slow. Note that there is no way to quickly switch between one mode and the other, but you have to swipe one by one, which is quite annoying. But once you are inside the professional mode, notice that you can manipulate several parameters. For example, the shutter speed can go up to 1/5 of a second, which is not very high. The ISO can go up to 1600, and you can also manipulate the focus manually and also the white balance, as well as other settings like contrast and saturation. Obviously, it doesn't offer raw photo capture. We'll leave that for more expensive devices. But another criticism we can make to the camera interface is that it is poorly translated. For example, it says vertical instead of portrait. This is a bad translation into Spanish, so there are still things that could be improved. If you want to scan QR codes, note that you can do it from the main interface, but fortunately you can move to the More section and open the specific scanner. And in this sense, it works well. Finally, it doesn't have a document scanner, so you won't be able to do that natively. You have to install another app. The camera of this device supposedly has a very high resolution, but the reality of things is that the picture looks with a lower resolution than the account. So do not expect to find a very high level of detail or something similar. Even so, I think that if you don't zoom into the picture, the result still looks positive. In terms of color, if you use the high resolution mode, you might get a little more detail. But the reality of things is that it's not as advisable to use the high resolution mode because it handles color a little strangely. Notice that there are some very odd grains placed throughout the picture, but as I say, with the automatic mode, I think you get good enough results. Good in terms of color, but not so good in detail. And if you notice in terms of zoom, we are going to notice that it is not something so spectacular. Although in the price range, no device is going to be able to stand out in this section specifically. The maximum zoom it offers is 10x, but we are not going to find that much detail. I think that at 5x, we could say that it is the maximum zoom where there is still an acceptable quality. And in the 3x zoom, it is also noticeable that it is digital zoom. At night, it is obvious that it could suffer a little more than necessary in the darkest areas. But I think it controls the noise well and even controls well the brightest areas so that they are not overexposed, which I think is very good in this price range. However, as I say, the darker areas could have a low level of detail, although with a very well controlled noise. The device does not have ultra-wide camera, so we are going to depend on the panoramic mode. However, I think the experience is positive since it is a panoramic mode that does have a good resolution. You do not notice the merger between each of the photographs, and if we are granted a good space, simply what would have to be improved would be the dynamic range, because if there are some overexposed or burnt areas. But in the price range is understandable. For macro photography, you notice that the main camera can get close enough to these small objects even though you don't have a macro camera. So the result, I think, is positive in this sense. In fact, if you try to do a little bit of digital zoom, I think you will manage to have some photographs that could be very attractive in the price range. For backlit photography environments, the preview is not well optimized, but note that after processing the photograph, It optimizes well, balancing highlights and shadows. Maybe the shadow areas with a little weird color tonality, but I think in the price range it does a very good job. However, in portrait photography, complete disappointment, since supposedly its additional camera should help to have portraits with greater precision. But in this case, we realize that it is not able to detect objects, not even objects you hold in your hand, so portrait photographs really come out very badly. In all other things, it's a camera I liked, but in portraiture, it does disappoint a lot. For video recording, note that we are going to have available simply the full HD resolution at 30 frames per second. This with the main camera, although with the front camera will only be in 720p, the maximum quality. Something positive is that it has a level control to have the straight shot. It also has a white balance selector manually, also anti-flicker, and also you can turn face detection on or off, as well as audio. While you are recording video, note that you can pause and resume recording. You can also take pictures while you are recording, which is a good thing. The zoom control is on the right side, which is quite odd, so it's quite complicated to manipulate. When you are recording while holding the device with one hand, you will have to make a two-finger gesture or hold the device with two hands in order to... It doesn't let you zoom, so that's something I didn't like. It also does not let you turn on or off the flashlight while you're already recording, let alone rotate the front camera. Let's say it has very limited capabilities in this regard. It also has no pro mode. For video recording, we will find something quite simple. In fact, the level of detail is very low. The color saturation, I think, is slightly good, although a little more saturated than we would like. Fortunately, I think that in these conditions, we are not seeing very aggressive jumps in exposure, which is already remarkable. But despite being a full HD video, the reality of things is that the detail does not look as high as it should. Also note that it has neither digital nor optical stabilization. So if you're walking, the result is really quite bad. And if you're running, it's obviously going to get much worse. On the other hand, in the evenings, we are again going to find a little more color saturation than you might expect. In this case, if you could notice that the exposure management can get to have a little more aggressive changes, but even in the darkest areas, I think it controls noise well. The truth is that for the price, I think it records well in low light conditions, although obviously it doesn't balance highlights and shadows well. Speaking of that, look at the result we have recording backlit. Even the focus can suffer. It will always give priority to illuminate the face, sacrificing all the back areas, overexposing completely and burning. So if you're shooting backlit, I'd recommend turning off face detection. Fortunately, this is a setting you can manipulate in the camera settings. Note that by disabling this option, we won't see these aggressive jumps in exposure. Obviously, the shadow area is going to be a bit dark, but I prefer this setting, so the experience is positive, giving the user the ability to turn it off or on. The focus in good lighting conditions, I think it doesn't suffer as much, although it does feel a bit slow. However, in more difficult lighting conditions, we do see that the focus can behave a bit more shaky. Regarding the zoom, we will notice that we are not going to find a good experience. In fact, it looks a bit pixelated. The result after a few seconds improves in sharpness, but when you are getting to the maximum zoom, you find this jelly effect that is quite annoying, although a bit common in the entry range. So let's say that it does not get to offer something beyond what one would expect in an economic device. Where it can come to surprise is that it incorporates slow motion, although it must be said that it applies a fairly large crop on the sensor, so it even seems that you are using a telephoto camera or something similar. In this case, the resolution will be HD, and it's going to go at 120 frames per second, which I think for sharing videos on social networks or something similar is going to give you a positive experience. I like this, and it's definitely nice. We are also going to find the fast camera mode, although note that it does not have stabilization, so to go recording moving scenery or people could give you a little strange result. Plus, it has an automatic speed setting that does not let you modify. Regarding the front camera, we will also notice a fairly simple quality. In fact, in this case, the maximum HD quality does not even reach full HD, so it definitely does not give a very nice result. You will also notice that it does not have stabilization, so if you're walking, it generates a lot of vibrations, and in backlight, it will overexpose and completely burn the most illuminated areas. Obviously, it is not going to be a recommended device if you want to record vlogs or something like that. Even a video is perceived at a low rate of bits per second. So if there are very fast movements, the video could generate a pixelated effect, a little ugly. Although fortunately, as I was saying, you can enable or disable face detection. So if you disable it, you're going to avoid overexposing the illuminated areas too much. Although your face, if you are going to be seen with enough darkness, In night conditions, you will notice that it tries to eliminate noise, but with that, it also eliminates quite a lot of detail, confirming that you do need a well-lit scene to have a good video quality. If you move to darker areas, you will notice much more noise, and that the colors are distorted enough, so it is advisable to be near light sources that are able to improve the light capture of this camera. In the software, we are going to find Android 14, so it does not come with the latest, plus the customization layer is supposedly realme UI, but it is a much simpler addition. As you saw, the camera comes with a rather ugly design, plus it doesn't have all the features we usually see in higher-end Realme devices, so consider that. Consider also that it doesn't have a software update policy, so it's probably going to stay all its life on Android 14. This causes its lifespan to be much shorter. In terms of software features, he knows that we are going to find, for example, a customization center where we are going to have several wallpapers available. We can also get to customize the icons thematically, i.e. they will take a single color to dye, which is quite good. In fact, you could also select a prominent color. Although it may take a little longer to change, and note that not all icons take this shade, plus it only applies to the main screen. You can also change the color of the clock on the lock screen if you want to get to have a different level of customization, or you can also apply the featured colors and change its brightness. Since we're talking about the lock screen, we can also access to customize the shortcuts that appear in the corners, depending on what it is that you want to have at hand. And we will also be able to enable or disable the lock screen magazine, which I personally find annoying. It is a lot because there are different images that will change every time you want to unlock your phone. Sometimes they are too strange images, so I would prefer to turn off this option. Fortunately, there is the switch available on the lock screen. You can also add certain text that you want to be available, and you can also add different users. In fact, you can also turn this option on to show the device controls without having to unlock the cell phone, that is to say, this section of switches. And as you notice, it also has the activation gesture when you pick up the phone to turn on the screen, and you can also double tap on any empty area of the home screen to lock this device. So I think it brings good interaction options. Note that it also has an option called mini capsule that is going to be activated, among other things. When you put the phone to charge, it is simply a small animation that shows in the area of the front camera drop notch. This mini capsule is also activated when you are playing music. Notice that it shows you a small animation, and if you press on this capsule, it shows you the name of the song and the time in which it is. However, it does not show you any specific control, like to go to the next song or something similar. You can simply detail half the song, but you cannot resume it. It could also show you some event in your calendar when it is going to come out as a kind of reminder. Also, on a daily basis, it could give you the weather at some moments, and it could warn you in that same animation when you have used a lot of your mobile data, plus some goal achieved in your daily steps level. But as you see, it is simply a matter of animation, but it does not offer such advanced interaction as we have seen elsewhere. The dynamic button will be the on-off button, which, in addition to the fact that on the camera allows you to manipulate the zoom if you have this option enabled quite easily, as you realize. It is also going to allow us to take advantage of this button in other aspects. For example, you can double tap this button and notice that it is going to switch between vibration mode and sound mode. As if it were a kind of switch, you could also double tap this button to choose some action, for example. To open the camera in photo mode, then it can also become a convenient shortcut if you are browsing anywhere else and want to open the camera. You could also select to open any other application you want when you double tap this button, so it is quite convenient. I think it is very well used, and it is something that we will not find in other devices in the price range. In fact, you could also select it to turn on the flashlight quickly by double tapping this button, so it is a convenient shortcut. In fact, you can also select what you want to happen when you slide this button up. By default is to manipulate the volume. In fact, you can lower or raise the volume without any problem. Although the gesture is not so easily recognized, it seems that you have to go slowly over it, but it could also serve you to slide the panel from quick settings down. As you realize, I think it will be a positive interaction experience. And finally, while holding down the button, you could also call the voice assistant, or you could just activate the on-off menu. Previously, we already tested the noise reduction, and it also brings the motorcycle mode, which, let's say, it's going to change the interface a little bit. You just have to assign all the necessary permissions and watch. You can plot a destination and have your player, and it's quite complex, so it's a big music player. Something interesting is that we will find gestures in the air, something that is usually available in more expensive devices. So it can become one of the most outstanding options. It works to answer calls or mute incoming calls. This is especially useful when you are washing the dishes or when you have wet hands. So it's pretty easy. But it is not only available for calls, but also available when you use apps. In this case, compatible with Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube. Watch, for example, how I can place my hand and start scrolling. Although it seems that the detection is not so agile or so easy, let's say that the palm of your hand should not be so close to the camera. But you must be far enough away so that it can start this detection. And anyway, as I tell you, it is quite complex. At least on Facebook, it's not working very well for me, even though in the tutorial it does detect my hand well. So the idea is really very good, because if I have used it on other devices, but the implementation is bad because the device does not detect these gestures. As I say, I've been testing it on other devices, and this is the only one in which I definitely have not managed to use them. Although in the tutorial, if you get to detect my hand, but once I'm inside the device, I can't use them. Of some application just does not work. We will also find gestures with the screen off that are a little more traditional. For example, to turn on the screen or even to turn on the flashlight. Then I think it does give many options to the user to choose their favorite controls. We also find the screenshot gesture by sliding 3 fingers down, and also to lift the phone and turn on the screen, there is an option called Easy Bell that what it will do will be, it also prevents the phone from ringing too loudly once you've already held it when a call is coming in. It also has some options to raise the sensitivity of the screen when you are using some protection or the device is inside a bag, and comes with some options, supposedly artificial intelligence, to improve the fluidity of the device and improve the gaming experience. Although curiously it is turned off, so we will be testing it with this function. Off as it comes by default. It also has a one-handed mode, but to activate it requires that you have gesture navigation enabled. If you use button navigation, you could also turn on a shortcut that will show up as a floating button to enable or disable this mode, which, as you can see, only goes down vertically. So it makes it a bit tricky to reach things on the other end. In this case, we will not find a floating screen mode, but if we can enable a split screen view, although not all applications are compatible, as you realize, but at least if we can have this level of productivity. By the way, the applications remain linked in the list of recent applications, so it seems to me a good implementation. With regard to security, we will find a side fingerprint reader. In this case, it will allow us to a maximum of 5 records, and it also has facial recognition, although that one is less secure as it's only in 2 dimensions. The fingerprint reader seems to me to work well, although being a bit thin, you might need to very accurately place your finger for an effective reading if you want to avoid having to constantly place your fingerprint. Note that it also features Google Extended Unlock, where you can register trusted locations or devices too. The safe can be kept unlocked in these environments. With the latest update of Google services, also integrated theft protection, which somehow smart will try to detect if someone has stolen your phone to have a lock. By default, it comes off, so it is important to pass that thanks to Google. It also incorporates a password manager through which you can fill in the forms. Although by default, it does not request a fingerprint for or verify, but if you could configure it that way. Thanks to Google, you could also find your device in case of being lost. So as you realize, in several security features depends on Google. However, Realme also adds some security options. For example, we have the safe that, as you will notice, can be accessed through a pattern or even your fingerprint. Here you can store images, audio, documents, or other files. However, as you see, realme also adds some security options. For example, we will find the application lock, so that through a pattern, you can designate applications that you want to request verification before entering. Only in this case, it will not work through fingerprints, but only through a pattern. We will also find a safe with the same operation to access. Here you can save private items, and finally you can hide some of them. You can also use the apps from the main screen, and to display them you must enter the phone application and there enter the special code that you have designated. It also has an option to clone applications and be able to use two accounts of the same application on the phone, and comes a little hidden. But also integrates the children's mode, through which you can have a safe environment in case you want to lend the phone to a small. So you cannot open any other application more than what you have authorized. Note that it also has a security center where you will find several of these tools that I mentioned, and also find a scanner against malware, and in the settings you can choose whether you want to use the Avast engine or the Avira engine, so you have a good collaboration to fight against any type of malware without relying solely on Google Play Protect. The truth is that I think that in several elements of the security software is very well enhanced and can get to stand out from other rivals in this price range. Let's now talk a little about the battery. Its capacity is 5000 mAh, like the vast majority of smartphones today. Only in this case, the processor is not as efficient. So in fact, the battery life in my tests was below average, did not reach 4 hours, nor in my, I didn't do a close-up drain test, nor in my background test. In fact, oddly enough, during these tests, it marked that it was too hot and better turn off the flash I keep on so I can quickly discharge the device. Then I can tell you that the battery does not get to stand out. Fortunately, it has the normal saving mode, a super saving mode that would also allow you to have a little longer autonomy, although the ultra mode is obviously more focused on emergencies. With regard to the charging power, we will find a charger of only 10 watts. So we will really see that it is quite slow. In 15 minutes it reached 12%. In 30 minutes it reached 22%, and the full charge was completed in 171 minutes, that is almost 3 hours. So the truth is that it charges quite slowly, and the worst of all is that the charger says supercharge, so it is rude what they have done. They should not have put supercharge, they would have simply put 10 watts. And that's it. Also, in terms of software, we are not going to find charging protection mechanisms, smart charging, charging lock, or anything like that. So in that sense, also the experience falls quite short. In terms of connectivity, we will simply find support for 4G networks. In this case, it should be noted the absence of an option to block mobile data for certain applications, as if we find it in other devices, realme more expensive, but in this edition, we did not find that, so you have to manually take care of mobile data consumption. We are also going to find support for Wi-Fi 5 networks, which is the special thing. Just do not expect very high speeds when downloading content or anything like that. It has Bluetooth 5.0, which is also perceived a little old, although we can come to understand because the device is inexpensive, has no NFC, no FM radio, which is surprising because in this price range, the majority. The other devices do have FM radio, so if you wanted to use that option, it is important to note its absence. In this case, fortunately, it does have wireless screen projection mode, but in this case, it is only in mirror mode without any advanced option. Fortunately, it does integrate Android Auto, and as for sensors, the experience is positive because it does have an accelerometer, geomagnetic field sensor. It even has an orientation sensor, and the proximity sensor is completely physical. So in this sense, it does not disappoint, and we could even say that it surprises. With regard to ecosystem, it is clear that realme still does not have something so solid. Although it will offer realme buds, realme pad and watch, we will not really find an advanced interaction between these devices. Let's say that it doesn't matter if you have a realme cell phone or a cell phone of another brand, you can use the accessories of this brand. In the same way, for interaction with other devices or ecosystem things, it will depend entirely on technologies developed by Google such as Quick Share or Google Fast Pair. For cloud storage, it relies on Google Drive and Google Photos. For home device control, it depends on Google Home. As you can see, it is quite dependent on Google, although it should be noted that it has its own app store in addition to Google Play Store called App Market, which it shares with Oppo. So at least in the distribution of applications, we could say that it is not so dependent on Google, but in the rest of ecosystem things, yes. Let's go to the test of opening applications to see more or less the performance I can get to have this device incorporates the Unisoc T6112 processor, a processor that we have already seen in other devices and obviously is aimed at the entry range. It has a simple performance, plus it comes bundled with 4 gigabytes of RAM, so it probably won't have capabilities to keep so many apps open at the same time. In this case, we are going to test by opening 10 apps to see how it fares, and as you notice, it took 5.2 seconds on average to open each of these 10 apps. If we were to do a more extensive test, the average would be stretching as the first 2 apps open fast, but then it was getting slower. Let's go now to see if these applications that we have running are kept open. They are 10 in total. Here it looks like there was some sort of restart, although it looks more like it just updated the feed. In this case, if we are looking at a complete restart of the application, it seems that it will not have great capabilities to maintain such a smooth execution when you have several applications open. It is probably going to be more convenient to have only 4 applications open, such as Maximum, since it observes that if you can get very slow when trying to switch between multiple applications. In this case, they incorporate up to 4 gigabytes of virtual RAM in the configuration supposedly, and in fact in this case comes on. So in theory, we would have at this time 12 gigabytes of RAM, but we confirm that it is useless. In fact, I would recommend you turn off that option because it is only consuming storage and really does not look like it has 12 gigabytes of RAM. It is full of reboots, so it definitely has the performance of 4 gigabytes of RAM. Notice how having less applications open the device if you can get to behave fluid without too many reboots, and as you see it does. Not freeze. Then I think actually the processor is good. The RAM memory is the one that could get to limit the experience. Notice again we saw a reboot. Then actually I think we will conclude that a maximum of 2 applications at the same time, so that if you can manage to still maintain a smooth experience. Look, the application has just been restarted. Definitely the RAM memory actually seems to be like 3 or 2 gigabytes because it really is very short. This possibly due to the large amount of options that realme adds in the system, because as you noticed in the software section, we saw something very positive. But that has a cost, and with 4 gigabytes of RAM, it seems that the experience in performance can become very short. In storage, we will find 128 gigabytes. I think it is something positive, although in the price range, there are already options with 256 gigabytes. Although fortunately, in this case, if it supports expanding storage via micro SD cards, then that is positive. But let's see how it goes, more or less. In the speed test, it's obviously going to reach an intermediate level. It's not going to be a lightning fast storage, so I think it's within the range of what's possible. As for the performance, which we might expect, it neither surprises nor disappoints. The reading speed, as always, is going to be a bit slower, but to do a real-life test, we're going to export a video. It is worth noting that these are videos recorded with this device, so they are not extraordinary quality. They should not be that heavy. We are going to export in full HD, and we are starting. Remember that we are going to find a video with a total duration of 1 min by trimming several clips recorded with this device. That's it. It's done. It took about 49 seconds. Obviously, it's a bit slow device for video editing. Let's go now to talk about gaming. Notice that it comes with a specific application to manage all your content. In this case, it also allows you to select 2 performance profiles if you want a balanced profile or an ultra profile. At the top, it also shows you a frames per second counter and some other data. The truth in this sense stands out for the price range, where we usually find much simpler things. Note that here you can activate which games you want to be displayed and when you run some content. Note that also appears this small sidebar where you can take a look at the latency that you can get to have in your wireless connection, also counting frames per second, percentage of CPU and GPU consumption, and also the battery percentage. You can also change the performance profile once you have started running your game, and it has some network optimizers. It also has an option to speed up the RAM a bit and free up space. We also have the do not disturb mode to avoid any kind of interruption while you are playing. And there is also an option to simply dim the screen while the game is downloading content in order to not consume so much battery. Interestingly, there is also an option called Hyper HDR, which will try to optimize the graphics a bit. Since the screen is not that spectacular, then it might come to help a bit in some content. Honestly, the frames per second counter, I think it does not work, because since I opened the game says 60, but I like that it brings a good suite of options that usually in this price range is very difficult to find. So you can also highlight as a positive point. In Call of Duty, this device loads by default low graphic quality at medium frame rate. However, if you can go up to medium graphic quality and high rate, and also has some experimental features. Although few graphic effects available, in this case, the truth is that the experience was good. Even recording the screen, we will have a smooth gaming experience, even above what one would expect in this price range. So it performs quite well. Good. Obviously, you will have to have any other application close to have good experience, but even with this graphics quality, which was the maximum that allowed us to choose, the performance is remarkably good. Also without heating. Then we played Legends. In this case, we chose the low graphics quality at 60 frames per second to see more or less what it was capable of. And the truth is that, again, we will find a good experience. Maybe at the beginning you can get to have a few drops in what is loading, some textures and more things. But after that it behaved quite well. The lowest peak was 22, but I insist it was a brief moment. Actually, most of the time it stayed close to 60 frames per second as long as you have the graphics quality low. But it is remarkable that if you can play and experience close to 60 frames per second in this price range. Then we played SpongeBob. In this case, by default, is the medium resolution and quality at 60 frames per second. For the test, we simply lowered the resolution. Although we kept the quality at medium, and in this case, we saw a little less stability. Let's say that if there are more fluctuations, but it never freezes completely, so it is a little unstable, but still gives you a positive experience of gameplay. Possibly the best thing would be to set the resolution and quality as low as possible to have a slightly smoother experience without so many fluctuations. Still, I think this is a game that we generally test on slightly more expensive devices and the experience was still positive. Finally, we played Free Fire. In this case, we chose the high frames per second setting, although we reduced the graphics quality down to the soft preset. And note that in this case with this one, graphics configuration, if it is capable of reaching 60 frames per second, so the experience is going to be positive, as long as you play with graphics qualities commensurate with the price that this device has. Best of all is that it did not get hot in any of the tests, so I insist if it is a good choice for gaming, as long as you are willing to play with a low graphics quality. In conclusion, it seems to me that it is a device that can compete well in the entry range due to its resistance above all. As you noticed, I did several tests, and it seems to me that it did hold up well. In addition, another of its strengths will be the software that comes with good added options for both security and practicality for the user. Evidently, like many entry-level devices, it will have other limitations such as RAM memory, or in this case, the fact that it has a very low price. That it only has one microphone, so it is up to you as a user what you prefer the most, but I think it can compete in a good way. For the moment, we have reached the end of this video. We hope you liked it. If you did, you can tell us, and see you next time.